Let's talk about some common conditions that we're seeing in offers today in Hamilton, Ontario. But before we do that, my name is Justin Little, and I'm a local real estate agent here in Hamilton, Ontario, and I love making educational videos about the market. If you like what you see, be sure to pop a like on it, and if you haven't already, subscribe and join the growing community. So this week, I'm having this conversation a lot dealing with buyers. We're just going through conditions, what's typical, what to expect, and also kind of walking people through the conditions. I realize there's a lot of people that have never had these conditions explained to them, so I figured why not explain them? But to do it better, let's flip over to the view of one of our forms. All right, so now that we're in the form view, let's walk through a couple conditions, well, a few conditions and actually warranties that we're putting in a lot of our offers. Starting with the first one is the financing condition. So these conditions are pretty standard in wording across the board, but it's still worthwhile to read them to understand exactly what they mean, whether you're a buyer or a seller. So going through it is the first condition of financing satisfactory at the buyer's own expense. So unless the buyer gives notice in writing to the seller, not later than blank business days. So how many business days do we usually see for this type of condition? Usually we see 5 business days. This is because even if somebody is pre-approved, it can take a couple days just for the to reaffirm that they are pre-approved, but then a few extra days for the lender to actually qualify the property. So even though somebody is pre-approved financially, we need to make sure that the property makes sense in the lender's eyes and it fits for these people and the financing they're trying to obtain. So 5 business days is what we usually see there. So if you don't deliver notice in writing within 5 business days, then this condition becomes null and void and the deposit returned in full to the buyer without deduction. So this condition is included for the benefit of the buyer and may be waived to the buyer at his sole option by notice in writing to the seller within the time period stated herein. So the seller agrees to cooperate in providing access to the property for the purpose of this condition. So there's a few things here. The one thing to note is if you don't waive this condition as a buyer, you get your deposit back in full with 0 deductions. There's no penalty. So if the deposit was $10,000, you get the full $10,000 back. Another point, this is at your sole and absolute discretion. So say that you go through the process, even though you're pre-approved, you don't like the interest rate. That can be a reason. The payments, you end up figuring out that maybe they're too high. That could be a reason you walk. You don't have to provide proof that the financing wasn't obtained. It's at your sole and absolute discretion as to whether or not you are comfortable with the financing that you've been given. Another part is why would we need access to the property? Well, typically, if somebody's putting 20% or more down on the property and it's not insured, this will trigger an appraisal from the bank a lot of times. So an appraiser may need to access the property. You don't go with the appraiser if you're the buyer. If you're the seller, the appraiser's coming on their own, 10, 15 minutes in and out, looking around the house, making some notes, and that's how the appraisal process works. The next condition that we commonly have is inspection. So finance and inspection are the 2 most common ones. And the inspection is worded pretty much the same way. It's at the buyer's own expense, which right now in Hamilton, the average cost for a home inspection is around $500. So unless they give notice in writing with how many days, so 5 business days, typically we tie them together. The main reason is, you want to get your financing done first, and then usually we do the inspection a little bit later, like on business day 4 or business day 5, when we know the financing has been secured. Because as I mentioned, it's $500 on average for a home inspection. You don't want to spend that money unless you know that you are financially qualified to do it. As well, the seller has to provide access to the property, and it's worded in the same way that it's at your sole and absolute discretion. So not, you don't have to have something major come up with the house to walk from the deal. If there's a lot of minor issues and you feel like you're not comfortable to proceed with the deal, then definitely you can walk on it because it's at your sole and absolute discretion there. As well, you get the deposit returned in full if you don't waive this condition. So much like financing, if you gave a $10,000 deposit and you walk from the deal on an inspection condition, you get your $10,000 back without any deduction. So again, these conditions really are escapes for the buyer. They're there for the buyer's benefit, which is why sometimes when you're in a competitive scenario, not putting these conditions in makes your offer more lucrative just because the seller doesn't have to worry about you walking from the deal. Now, another condition that I want to mention, we don't see this too common, but I have put it here and there. This is a condition on insurance. So this is worded very much like the inspection and for the financing as well. But with the insurance clause, sometimes we have older homes in Hamilton that might have high-tech plumbing or might have knob and tube wiring. So you just want to ensure that you're able to actually obtain insurance on the property before finalizing the deal, or checking to make sure the premiums you're paying to have these in the house aren't more than what you expected and going to throw off what you budgeted in your expenses every month. Then we put in a couple of warranties. Now, the first one is a warranty on the chattels and fixtures. This is a lot of legal jargon in this clause. The party's warranty shall survive and not merge on the completion of this transaction. So what does this mean? We put this in every offer because this means that everything that's included in the offers, like the appliances, the light fixtures, that sort of stuff, needs to be in working order on closing date. So the fridge, the dishwasher, all needs to be working. If for whatever reason they're not working, they need to be either repaired or replaced. Now, this only covers the condition of these items up until the actual closing day at midnight, the very next day. So if you close on Friday, Saturday at like 12:01 a.m., if the fridge breaks, it's your responsibility as the buyer. All this ensures is that everything sort of needs to be maintained up until closing and working when you take possession of it. If you do close and you have an issue with an appliance on the same day, you need to bring it up to the lawyer right away as well. This is why I recommend doing final walkthroughs as close to closing as possible so you can check these items. Then lastly, I put this in, and sometimes it gets some laughs from clients. Now, this doesn't go in, I actually don't see this in a lot of offers, but I put it in for good reason. I'm going to tell you why. It's some disclosures that people aren't legally obligated to disclose, but they could affect the house in your mind or the value of the house. For instance, the property was not used for an ongoing commission of crime, such as drug dealing, chop shop, something like that. As well, a murder or suicide did not occur at the property. Now, you think this is something that needs to be disclosed, but it actually is not, unless you are asked. So by putting these in here, by asking, the seller would have to disclose if any of these things happen, because a suicide is actually not something that needs to be disclosed. As well, the property was not previously owned by a notorious individual. For instance, you don't want to live in a house that some gang member lived in or somebody like that, and you're sleeping one night, and somebody still thinks that that the old person lives there, and it could end up in a bad situation for you. So this isn't something, again, that needs to be disclosed, but if it's asked, it's just something that we want to make sure we're aware of. There's also no reports that the property is haunted. I know some people are worried about it. Some people aren't. Some people care. Some people don't. Some people think it's cool if the house is haunted or there's a ghost. Some people will absolutely not live in a house if they think it's haunted. And then the house was not used as a former grow-op. The main reason being a lot of these grow-ops affect the ventilation. You can get mold, that kind of stuff. And it can actually have really bad air quality in the house and be a detriment to your health. So we just want to make sure that we're stating this. So when we go through this disclosure, when it goes through with the seller, they are agreeing that none of this stuff's happened. If after the fact it happened, you're forced to sell the house, you have a little bit to follow up here because the seller knowingly acknowledged these conditions. So this is standard what we put in our Schedule A. Sometimes we put a couple extra things here, a couple extra things there. But if you are making an offer, I would say financing and inspection are the two most common. I'd say you'd only put insurance if there's a reason to believe that the insurance would be higher or harder to obtain. And then always put the warranty on the appliances, unless they're being sold as is, of course. Or, and as well, always put the disclosures with everything in the house that's not an actual disclosure, but might affect the value of the house in your mind. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. I look forward to talking to you again. Take care.